The red indicator on Daniel Morrow's phone flickered to life, and for a moment he hesitated before unlocking the screen. He told himself he wasn't spying. He was protecting. That was the excuse he repeated every night since the cameras had been installed, small hidden lenses tucked into corners no one ever noticed. A wealthy man could afford many things, but peace of mind was not one of them. Not after losing his wife. Not after watching his daughter's future disappear in a single violent moment. Daniel had everything people admired from a distance: a successful tech empire, a mansion wrapped in quiet luxury, and a name that commanded respect. Yet none of that mattered when he stepped into Emma's room each night. His daughter lay still in her bed, her dark lashes resting against pale cheeks, her small legs unmoving beneath the blanket. Doctors had used careful words, but the meaning was brutal: she would never walk. Since that day, fear had become Daniel's constant companion. Fear of accidents. Fear of mistakes. Fear of trusting the wrong person. That fear was why Sophie was here. The young maid who moved softly through the house during the day, humming as she worked, speaking to Emma as if she understood every word. Daniel wanted to believe she was different from the others who had come and gone. He wanted to believe his instincts were finally right. But wanting wasn't enough anymore. After loss, hope felt dangerous. Rain tapped gently against the windows as Daniel leaned back on his bed, eyes fixed on the screen. The camera showed Emma's room. Sophie had just finished cleaning and should have been leaving. Instead, she sat beside the bed, unaware she was being watched. Daniel's chest tightened. This was the moment he always dreaded, the moment that might confirm his worst fears. Sophie reached out and took Emma's small hand, not with urgency, but with a calm patience that felt strangely intimate. Daniel frowned, his finger hovering over the screen ready to shut it off. Then Sophie spoke, her voice barely louder than the rain. And as Daniel watched what happened next, his breath caught, because this was not what he had been prepared to see at all. Sophie didn't notice the camera, and Daniel forgot about it too as the scene unfolded. She pulled a chair closer to Emma's bed and began speaking in a gentle rhythm, not rushed, not forced, as though time itself had slowed to listen. She wasn't talking the way caregivers usually did, with cheerful distractions or hollow encouragement. Her words were quiet, steady, and deeply personal. She spoke about the weather outside, about the birds that gathered on the garden fence every morning, about how the sun always returned even after the longest storms. Emma's eyes followed Sophie's face, wide and alert, as if every sentence mattered. Daniel felt an uncomfortable twist in his chest. He had spent months worrying about Emma's body, her care, her safety, yet he realized he rarely spoke to her like this. He loved her fiercely, but grief had taught him to be efficient, not tender. Watching Sophie now made him feel exposed in a way no business rival ever had. Sophie reached into her pocket and pulled out a small piece of folded paper. Daniel leaned closer to the screen. It was covered in simple drawings: flowers, clouds, tiny stick figures holding hands. Sophie laid it beside Emma and explained each picture as if sharing a secret. Then she did something that made Daniel sit upright. She gently lifted Emma's legs, supporting them with practiced care, and began moving them slowly, carefully, as though teaching them a forgotten language. There was no rush, no pressure. Only patience. Daniel's mind raced. Had he missed this in the care instructions? Had Sophie overstepped? His instincts screamed to intervene. Yet Emma didn't cry. Instead, her fingers curled around Sophie's sleeve, and a soft sound escaped her lips, something close to laughter. Daniel froze. He hadn't heard that sound in weeks. Sophie smiled, but there was sadness behind it, like someone who understood pain far too well. "We try," she whispered, though no one else was there to hear it. And in that moment, Daniel realized the cameras were no longer showing him danger. They were revealing something far more unsettling: the possibility that a stranger understood his daughter in a way he had never learned how to. Daniel shut the phone off, his hands unsteady, as if he had just witnessed something he wasn't meant to see. Sleep never came that night. He lay awake replaying every second of what the camera had shown him, questioning his own reactions. Part of him felt relief. Another part felt something far more uncomfortable: guilt. He had built an empire by controlling outcomes, predicting risks, and removing uncertainty. Yet with his daughter, control had slipped through his fingers, and fear had rushed in to take its place. The next morning, Daniel watched Sophie more closely than ever, though this time with his own eyes. She moved through the house with quiet intention, never treating Emma as fragile glass, never as a burden either. When Emma dropped her spoon, Sophie didn't rush to pick it up. She waited, encouraging Emma to try, praising the effort even when the spoon remained just out of reach. Daniel noticed how Emma's face changed, less distant, more engaged. It was subtle but unmistakable. As days passed, Daniel found himself lingering in doorways, listening. Sophie spoke to Emma constantly, describing ordinary moments as if they were adventures. She celebrated small victories most people would overlook. A steady gaze, a lifted hand, a sound that hinted at a word forming. Daniel had been measuring progress in milestones defined by doctors. Sophie measured it in moments. One afternoon, Daniel overheard Sophie humming an old melody while carefully stretching Emma's legs. It was a tune Daniel recognized instantly. Claire used to sing it while rocking Emma to sleep. His breath caught. Sophie noticed him standing there and fell silent, her eyes wide with concern. Daniel asked how she knew the song. Sophie hesitated before answering, her voice soft. She said her own mother used to sing it during difficult times, believing it reminded the heart not to give up. That evening, Daniel returned to the cameras not out of suspicion but curiosity. He saw Sophie sitting beside Emma, holding her hand, tears quietly slipping down her own face. She wiped them away quickly and smiled at Emma, as if refusing to let her sorrow become a burden. Daniel realized then that Sophie wasn't just caring for his daughter. She was sharing something deeply personal, something shaped by loss. And that realization pulled Daniel closer to a truth he had been avoiding. He was not the only one in that house learning how to survive pain. Daniel had promised himself he would stop watching, but habits formed in fear are hard to break. Late one evening, long after the house had settled into silence, he opened the app again. What he saw this time unsettled him in a different way. Sophie had returned to Emma's room after her shift should have ended. She hadn't turned on the lights. Only a small lamp glowed beside the bed, casting soft shadows on the walls. Sophie sat on the floor, her back against the crib as if she needed the closeness just as much as Emma did. She spoke in a low voice, telling Emma a story about a bird with an injured wing that learned to fly in its own way. Daniel felt his throat tighten. The story wasn't about miracles. It wasn't about suddenly being fixed. It was about learning new paths, new strengths. When Sophie finished, she rested her head against the crib and closed her eyes. Daniel watched her shoulders rise and fall, slow and tired. She looked like someone carrying more weight than her role ever demanded. The next day, Daniel finally asked Sophie why she stayed late. She didn't look defensive. She didn't look surprised. She simply said that Emma slept better when she felt safe, and that sometimes safety meant presence, not perfection. Her words stayed with him all day. Daniel began to notice changes in Emma that numbers and charts couldn't explain. She slept longer. She laughed more. Her eyes followed people instead of walls. Then something happened that shook Daniel deeply. During a routine checkup, the therapist paused, puzzled. Emma showed improved responsiveness, better control of her upper body. The improvement was small but real. Daniel drove home in silence, his heart racing. For the first time since the accident, he felt something close to hope, and hope frightened him more than despair ever had. That night, Daniel made a decision. He removed one camera. Just one. It felt symbolic, like loosening his grip on a life he had been trying to control too tightly. As he did, he realized the cameras had already given him their greatest gift. They hadn't exposed a threat. They had revealed a quiet kind of courage growing in his home, and it was changing everything. Letting go of one camera should have brought Daniel relief, but instead it opened a door he hadn't known was locked. Without the constant glow of the screen, he began paying attention in ways he never had before. He sat on the floor with Emma during the afternoons, awkward at first, unsure of his place. Sophie never pushed him aside. She simply made space, guiding him gently, showing him how to speak slowly, how to wait for Emma's response instead of filling the silence with his own fear. One evening, as rain traced quiet lines down the windows, Daniel noticed Sophie's hands trembling while she adjusted Emma's blanket. He asked if she was tired. Sophie hesitated, then admitted that caring for Emma reminded her of someone she had lost. Her younger brother had been injured years ago and required constant care. When their family couldn't manage anymore, he had been moved to a facility far away. Sophie visited when she could, carrying guilt that never truly left her. Helping Emma, she said, felt like honoring a promise she had never been able to keep. The confession struck Daniel deeply. For the first time, he saw Sophie not as an employee, but as someone whose kindness had been shaped by pain. That night, Daniel found an old box in the attic filled with Claire's letters and notes. He read them slowly, tears blurring the words. Claire had written about believing in people, about trusting love even when it hurt. Daniel realized how far he had drifted from the man she believed he could be. In the days that followed, Daniel made changes. He adjusted his work schedule. He attended therapy sessions instead of sending reports. He stopped measuring success in outcomes and started measuring it in effort and presence. Emma responded in ways that felt almost miraculous, not with sudden movement but with connection. Her laughter came easier. Her eyes searched for her father now. One afternoon, as Daniel held Emma's hand, she squeezed his finger. It was small, brief, but intentional. Daniel closed his eyes, overwhelmed. He understood then that protection wasn't about watching from a distance. It was about showing up, even when the future remained uncertain. And in that realization, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt since Claire's passing, a reason to believe again. The cameras were gone by the end of the week. Daniel didn't make a dramatic announcement or offer an explanation. He simply unplugged them one by one and stored them away like relics from a time ruled by fear. The house felt different afterward. Quieter yet warmer. As if trust itself had finally been invited back inside. Months passed and life settled into a new rhythm. Progress came slowly, almost invisibly, but it came. Emma learned to communicate with sounds and gestures that only those who truly listened could understand. Daniel learned that strength didn't always look like standing tall. Sometimes it looked like kneeling on the floor, meeting your child at her level, and staying there as long as it took. Sophie remained a steady presence, never seeking praise, never claiming credit. She celebrated Emma's smallest efforts as if they were great victories. One afternoon, during a family gathering, Emma surprised everyone. As Daniel spoke to her, she lifted her arm and reached toward him, her fingers stretching with determination. The room fell silent. It wasn't a miracle, but it was something earned through patience, love, and relentless care. Tears filled Daniel's eyes as he held her close, understanding that healing often arrives in whispers, not thunder. Later that evening, Daniel thanked Sophie, not with money or grand promises, but with words he had long avoided. He told her she had taught him how to trust again, how to love without fear controlling every decision. Sophie smiled and said she hadn't done anything special. She had only treated Emma the way every child deserved to be treated. As night settled over the house, Daniel sat beside Emma's bed, no screens, no silent watching. Just presence. He realized the true lesson of his journey was simple yet profound. Protection without trust creates walls, but protection guided by love builds bridges. And in choosing love, Daniel didn't just change his daughter's life. He transformed his own.